By our father's decree, I was made to share my husband with my 4 sisters. There, I've said it. The words feel like stones in my mouth, even after all these years. It's the kind of truth that splinters a life right down the middle, and I've been living on one side of that crack for more than 60 years. Folks here in town, they know me as Sojourner Taylor. Just an old woman, 79 years on this earth, living in this little house where the silence is a blanket I pull up to my chin each night. They see me at the market, choosing my apples with a careful hand. They see me tending to my hydrangeas, coaxing those big blue blossoms out of the stubborn Idaho soil. They say, "Mornin', Miss Sojourner," and I nod and smile, and they see a woman who's lived a quiet, simple life. They think my biggest worry is whether the frost will come early. They don't know that I carry a whole other world inside me, a valley hidden in the mountains that you won't find on any map. This town, it's a peaceful place. You can hear the train whistle from clear across the county on a cold night, a lonely sound that promises there's a world out there somewhere. In the mornings, the air smells sharp, like pine needles and damp earth, a clean smell that tries to wash away the past. But for me, all this quiet, all this peace, it's just the settled dust over a battlefield. I paid for this silence. My sisters and I, we paid with our names, our dreams, our very souls. So now I'm going to tell you how. I'm going to take you back to that place our father called Providence Valley, back to the day the world we knew was broken into 5 pieces. It's not an easy story to hear, and Lord knows, it ain't an easy one to tell. But a secret is a poison that you swallow every day, and my soul is tired of the taste. So I'm asking you for something more than just to listen. I'm asking you to bear witness, to stand here with me in the quiet of this room and look back at what happened. Because some stories, they don't belong to just one person. They belong to anyone brave enough to hear them. Before my name was just one of 5 spoken in a single breath, it was my own, Sojourner. Before our home became a house of whispers and watchful eyes, it was a place of light. It's funny how memory works, ain't it? The past can feel like a different country, a place you can visit but never live in again. Our country was Providence Valley, and in that country, my sisters and I were queens of our own small world. Ruth, with her steady hands that could calm any frightened animal. Esther, whose faith was so bright and clear it seemed to shine right through her skin. Leah, who carried a laugh in her pocket for every occasion. And little Dinah, who was like a wildflower, all delicate and shy until she'd burst open with some wild joy. I remember one afternoon. The summer was high and heavy, pressing down on the valley like a warm palm. We were supposed to be mending linens, but we'd snuck off to the creek bed where the wild mint grew thick and sharp. We gathered up armfuls of it, our fingers turning green and sticky, the smell so strong it felt like we were drinking it in. We took it to the old spring house, where the air was always cool and smelled of damp stone. It was our secret place. We brewed a whole gallon of mint tea, sweetened with honey we'd skimmed from the comb, and we sat on that cold floor, passing the jar between us, our talk weaving together like a braid. We spoke of foolish things, of what might lie beyond the peaks that walled us in. Leah swore she saw a picture in a book once of a city with buildings so tall they scraped the clouds. We laughed at her, but deep down, a part of me wondered. We were a single being in that moment, 5 parts of one heart, beating together in the cool, secret dark. The Lord was my witness. I was so happy. I felt my soul could have just floated right up out of my body. Even then, the seeds of what was to come were there in the soil. I just didn't have the eyes to see 'em. Our father, Josiah, would watch us sometimes, with a look I mistook for pride. He'd say, "Behold, my 5 daughters, strong and unified. A perfect vessel, worthy of the Lord's greatest blessings." We'd puff up our chests, feeling so special. We didn't understand he saw us not as daughters, but as a harvest he was cultivating for his own purpose. He was building a wall around us, brick by brick, with words of love and scripture. And Elias, he was the mortar holding those bricks together. He was Father Josiah's most devout disciple, quiet and watchful. He was always there, at the edge of things. I remember he'd never look at just one of us for too long. His eyes would move from face to face, a slow, appraising glance, One time, he brought a clutch of eagle feathers he'd found, beautiful and perfect. He didn't give them to anyone in particular, just laid them on the porch rail. "For the daughters of the valley," he'd said, his voice low and solemn. It felt like a holy offering then. Now I know it was a down payment. The thing is, the past gets cloudy. I remember the feeling of that sisterhood, the warmth of it, like a patch of sunlight on a winter's day. But the details, they slip away. I can feel the rough stone of the springhouse floor on my palms right now, but I can't rightly say if that was the same summer, or maybe it was the fall before, that a surveyor from the government found his way into our valley. It's all a bit hazy, like looking through a dusty window pane. My mind holds on to the feelings, you see, but the facts of when and where, they sometimes get loose from their moorings. But I know this for certain. That surveyor was the first domino. He carried a map and a strange-looking tripod, and he asked questions about land deeds and county lines, words that meant nothing to us. He was only there for a day, but his presence left a crack in our world. Father Josiah saw him not as a lost man, but as the first whisper of a corrupt world clawing at our door. The air in the valley changed after that. It grew tight, watchful. Father's sermons got longer, fiercer. He spoke of building an ark of faith to survive the coming flood of sin from the outside. A week later, he called the 5 of us into the main room of our house. It was just after supper. I remember the smell of wood smoke from the hearth. He stood before the fireplace, his shadow dancing on the walls, making him look twice as big as he was. His face was carved from stone, the way it got when he believed he was delivering a message straight from God. He told us he had prayed, that God had given him a vision, a way to forge a bloodline so pure, so strong it could withstand the coming decay, a way to bind us together, forever. And the tool for that binding, the man chosen to be the lock on our cage, was Elias. But what I didn't know then, what none of us could have fathomed, was that the surveyor hadn't just been asking about land. He'd carried a letter from a cousin my mother thought long dead, a cousin living in a town just 2 days' ride away, asking if she and her girls needed a way out. Father Josiah found it, and his vision wasn't a message from God. It was an answer to a threat he couldn't control. The moment Father Josiah spoke his vision into the room, the air turned to glass. We were all frozen inside it, 5 statues of disbelief. The silence that followed was louder than any scream. It was a roar of stolen futures, of girlhood's ending right there on that braided rug. He called it a holy union, a testament to our faith that would make Providence Valley a beacon to the world. He wanted to marry his 5 daughters to one man, to Elias. I looked at Ruth, then Leah, then Esther, then little Dinah, and in their eyes I saw my own face, pale and horrified. We were no longer girls. We were ingredients in one of Father's divine recipes. The days that followed were a masterclass in manipulation. Father Josiah was clever, you see. He knew that a fence built of fear is easily broken, but a cage built of love and duty can hold a soul forever. He didn't yell or threaten. He gathered us, his voice soft as lamb's wool, and told us what an honor this was. He said God had chosen us, his most precious jewels, for the most sacred of tasks. He painted a picture of our life to come, a home filled with harmony, a family that was the living embodiment of God's perfect will, and he made our revulsion feel like a failing. Our tears, he'd say, were a sign of weak faith. Our questions were whispers from the devil, tempting us away from our great purpose. He spoke to us one by one, finding the cracks in our resolve. To Esther, he spoke of piety and sainthood. To Ruth, he spoke of duty and setting an example of strength. To me, he spoke of loyalty, reminding me of all he'd given us, this safe haven from a wicked world. He was twisting our love for him into a weapon against us. The first transgressions weren't violent. They were quiet, orderly, and all the more terrifying for it. The courtship, they called it. Elias would come to our porch in the evenings. He'd sit on a stool Father Josiah had placed for him, and we'd be arranged in a half-circle of chairs, like pupils before a teacher. He never looked any of us in the eye for more than a second. He'd bring us things, never one gift for one girl, always 5 of the same. 5 smooth river stones, 5 bundles of dried lavender. It wasn't about winning our affection, it was about branding us as a set. Then came the day the women of the community, with cheerful, knowing smiles, came to our rooms. They packed our belongings into wooden chests. My worn copy of a book I loved, Leah's collection of colorful ribbons, Dinah's little carved bird. They carried them out of the home we'd known our whole lives and took them down the path to the new house they had built for us and Elias. Watching them carry away my things felt like they were carrying away parts of my own body. Each item they took was a piece of me, of Sojourner, and they were taking it to a place where I would only be one of the wives. The twist, the moment the true ugliness of it all showed its face, came on a cool evening. Elias was sitting with us, reading from the book of Proverbs. He paused, looked out at the darkening valley, and began to speak of his own past. He told us he was an orphan, that his parents had been taken by a fever when he was just a boy. He said Father Josiah had found him, wandering and alone, and had taken him in. I never knew the warmth of a true family, he said, his voice thick with a piety that made my skin crawl. This, what your father is building for us. It is the greatest gift a man could receive. His story was meant to make us feel sympathy, to see him as a lonely soul we were meant to comfort. But God, in his mysterious ways, sometimes lets the truth slip out through the cracks. A few days later, I was in the communal storehouse fetching flour. 2 of the elder women were there, their voices low. They thought they were alone. They were talking about Elias, and I heard them say his mother's name. I froze, my hand deep in the flour sack. His mother, they said, was a stubborn woman. She and Elias's little sister had been sent away years ago, cast out. Their crime? The mother had dared to question one of Father Josiah's prophecies. My blood ran cold. Elias wasn't an orphan. He was the son of a woman our father had banished. He had a sister, cast out into that wicked world he was so eager to save us from. The whole story was a lie, a carefully constructed fable to make him seem worthy, to make him seem like one of us. He had stood by and let our father break his own family apart, and now he was ready to do it again. I felt a wave of nausea. I ran from the storehouse, my heart hammering against my ribs. I had to tell someone. I found Ruth by the chicken coop, her face set in that practical, no-nonsense way of hers. I grabbed her arm, the words tumbling out of me in a frantic whisper, telling her about the lie, about his mother, his sister. She listened, her expression never changing. When I was done, she just pulled her arm away gently and went back to scattering feed for the chickens. "And what does it matter, Sojourner?" she said, not even looking at me. "Father has spoken. It is done." In that moment, watching her turn her back on me, on the truth, I understood the true nature of our prison. The walls weren't just the mountains around the valley or the rules of our father. The walls were now inside of us. He hadn't just trapped us, he had taught us how to lock our own doors. Once the vows were spoken in the assembly house, a ceremony as cold and brittle as a winter morning, our new life began. The world thinks a prison is a place with iron bars and stone walls, but a real prison, the kind you can't ever escape, is one where the bars are made of love and duty, and the warden is the face you once trusted most in the world. Our prison was a brand new house with wide windows and a sturdy roof, and it was the most desolate place I have ever known. We were moved in, the 5 of us and Elias, and the door to our old life clicked shut behind us. The isolation didn't happen all at once. It was a slow creep, like a killing frost. At first, friends from the community would stop by, but their talk was stilted. They'd look at the 5 of us, sitting in a row on the porch, and they wouldn't know who to speak to. They'd say, "The wives are looking well," as if we were a field of corn. Soon, the visits grew shorter, then stopped altogether. We were a curiosity, an institution, no longer people you could share a cup of coffee with. But the cruelest work happened inside those walls. Elias, under the guidance of my father, became a master at unraveling the braid of our sisterhood. He'd do it with such quiet subtlety. He'd praise Leah's bread at the dinner table, and for the rest of the week, Ruth, who'd always been the best baker, would be silent and tight-lipped. He would ask Esther to walk with him in the evenings to discuss matters of faith, and the rest of us would watch them from the window, a little seed of resentment taking root in our hearts. He wasn't giving love. He was distributing rations of attention, and he knew it was a currency that would make us poor in spirit and turn us against each other. We, who had shared every secret, began to hold our thoughts close, guarding them like precious coins. My world, which had once been as wide as the valley, shrank to the size of that house. The vibrant greens of the forest and the deep blue of the sky faded, and all I saw were the four walls of our shared room, the polished wood of the dinner table, the watchful eyes of my sisters. The silence changed, too. It used to be a comfort, a space we filled with our own dreams. Now, it was a weapon. The quiet at the dinner table wasn't peace. It was a battlefield of tiny wars. A fork placed too loudly, a refusal to meet another's gaze, a sigh heavy with unspoken meaning. I remember one morning, I woke up and realized we'd stopped braiding each other's hair. It was such a small thing, but it was everything. Our hands, which once wove our lives together every single morning, now couldn't even bear that simple, sisterly touch. I tried to fight it. I swear to you, I tried. I saw what was happening, how we were being filed down into dull, lonely things. I remember finding Leah crying in the pantry one day, her shoulders shaking. The old me, the me from the spring house with the mint tea, would have wrapped my arms around her. But the new me hesitated. Was she truly sad, or was this a performance for Elias's benefit later? The poison had sunk that deep. Still, I tried. I whispered to her, "Leah, do you remember the story you told about the cloud-scraping buildings?" She just stiffened, wiped her eyes, and said, "We were foolish children then," and walked away, leaving me alone in the dark with the smell of dried herbs and my own failure. Another time, I tried to speak with Esther, tried to ask her if this life of quiet bitterness was truly what God wanted for us. She looked at me with a kind of pitying horror. "Your heart is full of worldly doubt, Sojourner," she told me. "You must pray for humility. Father Josiah knows God's will." The real breaking point, the thing that showed me the true architecture of our cage, came on a rainy Tuesday, or maybe it was a Wednesday. The days had begun to blur into one another. It was my turn to clean Father Josiah's study in our old house. He was away, visiting an outlying family. As I was dusting his heavy oak desk, a drawer stuck. I pulled it harder, and a false bottom of wood shifted, revealing a slim, leather-bound journal beneath. It wasn't scripture. It was his own handwriting, his plans for the valley. My hands trembled as I read. He wrote not of faith, but of control. He wrote about the weakness of individual will, the danger of worldly attachments like friendship and personal dreams. And then I saw it, a passage that made the air leave my lungs. He wrote about his daughters. He wrote that sisterly bonds, if left untended, could grow into a thicket of rebellion. He wrote that managed friction and the careful distribution of favor were necessary tools to prune them back, to ensure they would grow toward the light of his authority and not toward each other. It wasn't an accident. Our jealousy, our suspicion, our heartbreaking distance, it wasn't a sad consequence of a difficult life. It was the design. Every stolen smile from Elias, every word of praise for one and not another, was a calculated move in a game we didn't even know we were playing. We weren't just sisters who had grown apart. We were a garden being systematically, intentionally poisoned at the very root. I looked out the window at the rain falling on the new house, our prison, and I felt a loneliness so profound it was like drowning. The gardener, the one we had trusted with our very souls, was our own father, and I was the only one who knew. The knowledge from my father's journal was not a key that could unlock my cage. It was just a small, sharp stone I had to keep hidden in my shoe. It pressed into me with every step, a constant, private pain reminding me that our suffering was not an accident of fate, but a carefully tended crop. Life in that house settled into a rhythm, the way a slow fever settles into the bones. It was a war fought not with fists or loud words, but with silence. A war of averted eyes, of praise given to one sister in the hearing of another, of chores completed with a simmering resentment that was thick enough to taste in the air. We'd pass each other in the hallway, my sisters and I, and it was like two ships passing in the night, each of us carrying a cargo of unspeakable loneliness. Elias would preside over our dinner table like a king on his throne, asking about the day's work. His questions were never for us. They were for the tasks. Was the mending finished? Was the garden weeded? We were the hands that did the work. Our hearts and minds were of no consequence. My father would visit once a week to lead us in prayer, his eyes sweeping over us with a look of deep satisfaction, as if admiring his handiwork. He saw 5 dutiful daughters, a harmonious household. He did not see the rot beneath the floorboards. He did not see the way Leah's hands trembled when she served the bread, or the hollows that were forming under Dinah's eyes. This routine, this predictable, soul-crushing sameness, was the real abuse. It was a slow, daily grinding down of the spirit, until you forgot the shape you used to have. I started to forget who Sojourner was. I'd catch my reflection in the dark glass of a window at night, and for a heartbeat, I wouldn't recognize myself. The face looking back was just a wife. One of 5. The edges of me were blurring, washing away into the collective. I used to love the feel of turning soil in my hands, the promise of a seed, but in that place, gardening was just a duty. I had once known the words to 100 little songs my mother had taught us, but my mind grew quiet. The songs belonged to a girl who no longer existed. My own thoughts began to feel dangerous, foreign. To think for myself was an act of rebellion I no longer had the strength for. To survive, you had to become small. You had to become quiet. You had to forget yourself. It's a strange thing, to watch your own soul pack its bags and leave, and to be too tired to even ask it to stay. The plot twist, the moment that slammed the door on any faint hope I might have had, was not a moment of cruelty, but one of celebration. On the 1-year anniversary of our marriage, my father declared a valley-wide feast to honor the success of our blessed union. Our house, our prison, was scrubbed and decorated. The whole community came, their faces beaming with pride. They brought pies and roasted chickens, their voices loud and cheerful, filling the rooms that were usually thick with our silence. They toasted my father's wisdom. They toasted Elias's gentle, godly leadership. They looked upon us 5, standing together in our identical gray dresses, as a miracle. I remember one woman, Martha, whose daughter I used to play with by the creek. She took my hands in hers. Her own hands were warm and soft. "Oh, Sojourner," she breathed, her eyes shining with tears. "You girls are a living testament. To live in such harmony, to be so free from the sin of selfishness that plagues the outside world. It is a beautiful thing." She squeezed my hands. "And that husband of yours, Elias, he is a living saint." I stood there, a smile cemented on my face. I could feel Leah next to me, rigid as a fence post. I could see Dinah's pale face, looking like a little ghost haunting the edges of the crowd. And I had to nod. I had to thank her. I was being praised for my own erasure, celebrated for my own slow death. And in that moment, I saw the truth. We were utterly, hopelessly alone. The entire world we knew was not just ignoring our suffering, they were applauding it. They were all jailers, every last one of them, and they didn't even know it. That night, after the last of the cheerful guests had gone, I lay in the dark of our shared room. The house smelled of stale joy. I listened to the quiet breathing of my sisters, 4 separate heartaches in the dark, and I gave up. The fight in me, that stubborn little flicker, it just went out. I stopped hoping. I stopped praying for a change. I just stopped. The silence I had feared became my only refuge, a deep, dark place inside myself where no one could get in. I know this is a hard place to leave you, in this pit of despair. It's a place where a soul just lets go. But I have to ask you, do you have the courage to stay with me in the dark? Because I promise you, a silence that deep, a silence like a grave, can't last forever. Eventually, something has to break. Subscribe to this channel if you're willing to bear witness to the day my silence finally learned how to scream. The resignation I felt after that anniversary feast curdled into something much darker. It became a kind of despair that settled deep in my bones, a permanent chill that no fireplace could warm. The silent war continued, but the battles grew more desperate, more cruel. The main casualty was our youngest, Dinah. She was withering before our very eyes. A flower denied the sun. She grew thinner, her eyes large and haunted in her pale face. She stopped speaking almost entirely, and sometimes I'd find her in a corner of the garden, whispering to a little stone she held in her hand, her face as serious and intent as if she were speaking to an old friend. She was retreating from us, from that house, into a world of her own making where the pain couldn't reach her. Seeing her fade away like that, it stirred something in me. A flicker of the old sojourner, the sister who brewed mint tea in the spring house. I knew my father saw Dinah's retreat as a spiritual failing, a weakness of character. But I saw it for what it was, a soul breaking apart. There was an old woman in the valley, Goody Martin, who was the closest thing we had to a healer. She knew herbs and remedies, but more than that, she had a kindness in her that felt ancient, from a time before my father's rigid rule. I got it in my head that if I could just get to her, if I could tell her about Dinah, she might help. She might know something. It was a foolish, desperate hope, but it was the only one I had. Then an opportunity came, or so I thought. Father Josiah announced that he and Elias had to travel to the neighboring settlement to trade for winter supplies. They would be gone for 2 days and 2 nights. The air in the house felt lighter the moment their wagon pulled away. The watchful eyes were gone. That night, for the first time in years, I saw a sliver of a chance. I waited until my sister's breathing had deepened into sleep. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. I slipped out of the house, a shadow moving through other shadows. The night was cold, the moon just a sliver of bone in the black sky. Every snap of a twig sounded like a gunshot. The walk to Goody Martin's cottage on the far side of the valley felt like crossing an entire continent, but with every step, the flame of hope grew brighter. I finally saw the dark shape of her little house against the trees. It was unlit, but that didn't matter. I crept to the door, my hand shaking as I raised it to knock. This was it. This was the moment it could all change. I knocked. Once. Twice. The sound was swallowed by the night. I waited. Then a light flickered inside. My heart leaped. But the silhouette I saw through the window was not the stooped, gentle shape of Goody Martin. It was tall and broad. The door creaked open, and the lantern light fell on the face of my husband, Elias. His expression was not angry. It was one of weary disappointment. And behind him, stepping out of the shadows, was my father. They had never left. The whole trip was a lie. The plot twist wasn't just that they were there. The true, soul-shattering cruelty of it was the realization that they had known. They had watched me nurture this tiny, fragile hope. They had let me walk all this way, my heart full of a desperate plan, just so they could stand there and watch it die in my eyes. It was a test, a lesson, a demonstration of their absolute power. "You see, daughter," my father said, his voice quiet, almost sad. "You see how your heart leads you astray? Into the dark? We knew you were unwell." The walk back to the house was the longest journey of my life. They walked on either side of me, not touching me. Their silence a crushing weight. They hadn't punished me. They had cured me. They had cured me of hope, the most dangerous sickness of all. When we got back, my sisters were awake, huddled in the main room, their faces pale with fear. They looked at me, not with pity, but with a kind of dread, as if I were a disease carrier. I had brought the wrath of our father and husband down upon the house. In their eyes, I saw my final failure. I hadn't just failed to save Dinah. I had endangered them all. That night, they didn't have to lock my door. There was no need. My spirit was the only thing that knew how to open it, and it lay dead on the path to the healer's house. I looked at myself in the dark reflection of the window pane, and I finally surrendered. The fight was over. They had won. I wasn't sojourner, the girl who dreamed of cloud-scraping cities. I was just a broken piece of a broken promise. And there, on the edge of that abyss of my own making, I let go. After the night I was marched back from the healer's cottage, a new kind of silence fell over our house. It was the quiet of a surrendered battlefield. I moved through my days like a ghost, my spirit packed away in a locked chest for which I no longer had the key. I did my chores, I bowed my head during prayers, I became the very image of the docile, broken thing they wanted me to be. The fight was gone. My sisters, in turn, treated me with a wide berth, as if I carried a contagion. They were polite, but distant. I had shown them the price of rebellion, and it was a price none of them were willing to pay. My father and Elias were pleased. Their great experiment was a success. Their confidence in their own power made them comfortable, unwary. And as it turns out, the arrogance of a man is often the first crack in the wall of his own fortress. The crack came in the form of a small, lumpy parcel wrapped in brown paper. Mail was a rare thing in Providence Valley, and what little came was always brought straight to Father Josiah for his inspection. But this time was different. A young boy, barely a man, whose family had only recently joined our community, was tasked with deliveries. He was careless, or maybe just ignorant of the unspoken rules. He saw my sister Ruth in the garden, her hands in the dirt, and he brought the package directly to her, saying, "This is for the wives' household." He smiled, tipped his hat, and was gone before anyone could say otherwise. Father and Elias were across the valley, overseeing the felling of a tree. It was a simple mistake, a moment of laxness, but it was the pebble that starts an avalanche. Ruth took the package. It was from a seed company back east. She opened it, thinking it was just the new bean seeds she'd requested through Father. Inside were several packets of seeds, but tucked among them, looking like nothing more than a folded planting guide, was a small, thin piece of paper. I watched her from the kitchen window. I saw her unfold it. I saw her body go stiff, her head whip around to see if anyone was watching. She quickly crumpled it in her fist and shoved it deep into the pocket of her apron. For the rest of the day she was jumpy as a cat, her movements jerky, and her eyes full of a fear I knew all too well. That night, when the house was still and dark, she came to my bedside. I thought she was going to scold me, to tell me to be more careful, to not rock the boat. Instead, she just stood there, a pale shape in the moonlight. She reached out her hand, and in her palm was the crumpled piece of paper. She didn't say a word. She just pressed it into my hand and left. My fingers, clumsy with a mix of fear and something I hadn't felt in a long, long time, smoothed the paper out on my blanket. It wasn't a planting guide. It was a note, written in a delicate hand I vaguely recognized. The memory was foggy. Had I seen this writing on a letter my mother received long ago? The note was short, and the words seemed simple enough. It said, "These heirloom seeds do poorly in the shade of a great old oak. For the best harvest, they must be planted in a sunnier plot. If you are ever in need of new ground, my gate is always open. I will be at the market in the town of Crossroads on the first Saturday of next month, selling my preserves. A great old oak. Father Josiah. A sunnier plot, a new life." It was from our cousin, the one whose first letter had been the cause of all this. Having never gotten a reply, she had found another way. A way to send a message that looked like nothing, a secret hidden in plain sight. It was brilliant. It was terrifying. I lay there in the dark, the flimsy paper clutched in my hand. Hope. It came rushing back in, and it was so painful it felt like my heart was breaking all over again. I had so carefully taught myself how to live without it, and here it was, a burning coal in the palm of my hand. Ruth, my steady, practical sister who had told me to give up, had brought this to me. She had chosen me. Not Leah, who might be too flighty. Not Esther, who was too devout. Me, the broken one. In her silence, she had forged an alliance. She had acknowledged the truth of our prison and asked me what we were to do about it. The trust in that simple gesture was staggering. It was the first real kindness I had felt in years. But the risk, God in heaven, the risk was unthinkable. Crossroads was days away, through treacherous country. And if we were caught this time, it wouldn't just be humiliation. It would be the end. I held that tiny seed of a chance in my hand, and I had to decide. Do I dare try to plant it, knowing it might grow not into a ladder, but into the gallows for us all? The note from our cousin burned in my pocket for 2 full days. It was a secret sun, warming me from the inside out. The alliance with Ruth was unspoken, a fragile bridge built across a chasm of silence. We'd meet each other's eyes over the dinner table, a flicker of shared terror and resolve passing between us. But 2 sisters were not enough. I knew I couldn't approach Esther. Her faith was a fortress with my father as its king. That left Leah, my sister of buried laughter, the one who dreamed of cities. Her spirit wasn't broken, just misplaced. Finding a moment alone with her was like trying to catch a specific raindrop in a storm. But I managed it, finding her folding linens in the cellar, the air cool and smelling of soap and earth. I didn't show her the note. The risk was too great. I stood beside her, my heart hammering, and I whispered just one word: crossroads. Her reaction was not what I'd hoped for. She flinched as if I'd struck her. Her eyes, wide with panic, darted towards the door. "Have you gone mad, Sojourner?" she hissed, her voice a raw, angry whisper. "After what they did to you? Do you want to be locked in your room? Do you want them to send us away to some place where we'll never be heard from again, like they did to Elias's own kin?" Her fear was a bitter wall between us. This was the first test of my newfound resolve. The old me would have retreated, apologized, but the image of Dinah whispering to her little stone gave me a strength I didn't know I had. "Look at Dinah," I whispered back, my voice shaking but firm. "Just look at her. She is disappearing, Leah. Is this God's will? For her light to be snuffed out like a candle? The girl who told us about cloud-scraping buildings is still in there. I know she is. And she is dying." I saw a flicker of something in her eyes, a memory, a pain. I pressed on. "This isn't about a dream anymore. This is about saving our sister's life. The note is real. There is a gate, and it is open." It took another day of whispered arguments, of tears and pleas. But finally she broke. She looked at Dinah, truly looked at her, and the wall of her fear crumbled. She nodded once, a sharp, terrified movement. We were 3. And so, the architecture of our liberty began. We built it in secret, with stolen moments and scraps of hope. Ruth, from her position as keeper of the larder, began to squirrel away food. A handful of dried apples here, a strip of salted meat there, hidden in a loose floorboard beneath her bed. It was a dangerous game. An audit of the pantry by Elias could be the end of everything. I, in turn, took on the task of finding a map. I remembered the surveyor all those years ago. My father was a man who collected things, who believed knowledge was power. On the pretext of doing a deep cleaning of his study, I went searching. My hands shook as I ran them along the spines of his books. Behind a row of severe-looking theological texts, I found it. A rolled-up map, not printed, but hand-drawn. It was the surveyor's map of the region, showing the treacherous paths through the mountains to the outer towns. It showed a place called Crossroads. Our greatest challenge was creating a believable story. We couldn't just vanish. The plan we devised was born of our prison. We would use Dinah's illness as our key. We went to our father, the 3 of us, our faces a mask of sober concern. We told him that we had heard stories of a rare mountain root, something that only grew in the high, rocky soil of the western ridge, that was known to restore a lost spirit. We asked for his permission, his blessing, to go and gather it for our poor, ailing sister. It was a perfect lie. It was pious, it was dutiful, and it showed a deep concern for the family unit. He looked at us, his eyes searching our faces for any hint of deceit, and seeing only the earnest, worried daughters he had trained us to be, he agreed. The plan was for the 3 of us to go, Sojourner, Ruth, and Leah. We would leave Dinah in the care of Esther. The thought of leaving her behind was a knife in my gut, but she was too fragile for the journey. We had to believe that once we were free, we could find a way to come back for them. It was a desperate, ugly compromise, and it haunted my nights. The night before we were to leave, the air in our room was thick with unspoken fear and anticipation. Our hidden packs were ready. Our map was committed to memory. I lay on my cot, staring into the darkness, my mind racing. Then, a sound. A floorboard creaking in the hall. My body went rigid. The door opened, a silent sliver of gray in the black. A figure stood there, and my blood ran cold. It wasn't Elias. It was Esther. She stood motionless for a long moment, her face a pale oval in the gloom. Then she stepped inside, her bare feet silent on the wood floor. She looked directly at me, and in her hands she held Dinah's favorite blanket, the one woven with faded blue flowers. She walked to the foot of my bed and laid it there, her movements slow and deliberate. Her voice, when she spoke, was barely a whisper, but it echoed in that silent room like a thunderclap. "It gets cold in the mountains at night," she said. "You'll need to keep her warm." Esther's words hung in the air, a shocking testament and a terrible command all at once. Keep her warm. She wasn't asking, she was telling us. My mind reeled. Esther, the most devout, the most obedient, was choosing to sacrifice herself. She knew she couldn't come. Her faith, twisted as it had become, was still her bedrock. But she would not let Dinah perish. In the frantic, silent moments that followed, Esther became our shield. She helped us dress a weak and confused Dinah, wrapping her in layers, her movements swift and sure. She pressed a small, heavy pouch into Ruth's hand, her own secret savings, a few coins she had kept hidden for years. There were no tearful goodbyes. There was no time. There was only the terrible, beautiful weight of her sacrifice. She was staying behind to face the storm so that we might have a chance to outrun it. The price of our freedom began right there, in that dark room, with the sister we left behind. We fled into the night, 4 frightened shadows against the vast, indifferent mountains. The journey was a new kind of hell. We were girls raised on soft valley soil, and the mountains were all sharp edges and cruel winds. The paths on the surveyor's map were little more than goat tracks, and more than once we found ourselves staring at a sheer rock face or a dead end, our hearts sinking with despair. The cold was a living thing, a predator that stalked us, seeping into our bones. But we had a purpose that burned hotter than the cold. That purpose was Dinah. She was a fragile little doll, her mind still lost in its own foggy country. We took turns carrying her, half dragging her, whispering words of encouragement she may not have even heard. We'd wrap her in her blue-flowered blanket, the one from Esther, and huddle together for warmth, the 4 of us, a single shivering knot of desperation. That journey, as terrible as it was, rewove the threads of our sisterhood that had been so brutally cut. We were one again, bound by a shared hope and the ghost of the sister we'd left behind. After what felt like a lifetime, I think it was 2 days, but time in the wilderness is a different sort of measure. We were on the verge of collapse. We were dirty, starving, and lost. We saw a plume of smoke in the distance and stumbled towards it, praying it was a sign of civilization. It was a small, lonely homestead, nestled in a hollow. An old man with a face like a road map and suspicious eyes came out to meet us. He held a rifle loosely in his arms. We begged him for water, for a crust of bread. He looked at us, his eyes lingering on our gray, simple dresses, our tired faces. "You're from the valley," he said. It wasn't a question. "From Providence." We nodded, too tired to be afraid. And that's when the next payment for our freedom was extracted. "One of you know the Miller boy?" he asked, his voice rough. "The one who does deliveries?" We looked at each other, and I remembered the young, careless boy who had given Ruth the package. "Josiah had him punished," the old man grumbled, spitting on the ground. "Shamed him in front of the whole assembly. Said the boy was careless, that he brought worldly contamination into the valley on a parcel from the outside. Said he put the whole community at risk." My blood ran cold. The old man continued, "Wasn't about no contamination. The boy did nothing wrong. Josiah just needed to make an example of him. Heard the whole Miller family was cast out last week." The world tilted. The price of the note, of our chance, had been an innocent boy's life, his family's home, their future. Father Josiah, in his cunning, couldn't admit a secret message had slipped past his watch. So he created a different crime, a different criminal, and he'd ruined a family to cover his own failure. The water the old man gave us tasted like ash in my mouth. I looked at Ruth and saw my own sickness of guilt reflected in her eyes. Leah began to cry, silent, angry tears. We had been so focused on our own cage, we never thought our rattling of the bars could bring the ceiling down on someone else. The old man pointed us toward the town, and we trudged on, the weight of the Miller boys' fate heavier than any of our packs. We finally crested a hill, and there it was below us. Crossroads. It was a real town, bustling with wagons and people, the air filled with sounds and smells so foreign it made my head spin. It was the first Saturday of the month, market day. We were here, we had made it. But as I stood there on that hill, looking down at the strange, swirling crowd, the hope I had clung to felt tangled with a terrible shame. We had paid for our escape with the sacrifice of one sister and the ruin of an innocent family. And I looked out at that sea of strangers, searching for the face of a cousin I hadn't seen since I was a child, and I prayed to a God I wasn't sure was listening anymore. I prayed that the freedom we had bought at such a terrible price was even real. Walking down from that hill into the town of Crossroads was like stepping off a cliff into a raging river. The noise was the first thing that hit me. A chaotic symphony of voices haggling, horses neighing, hammers clanging on anvils, and music from a fiddle player I couldn't see. After a lifetime in the calculated quiet of Providence Valley, it was a physical assault. My sisters huddled close behind me. Ruth's face was a grim, determined mask, but her knuckles were white where she gripped the strap of her bag. Leah looked stunned, her eyes wide as she tried to take in everything at once, and little Dinah clung to my hand, her small body trembling. I was their leader, the one who had gotten them here, and I was just as terrified as they were. The guilt over the Miller boy was a cold stone in my stomach. What if we had come all this way, paid such a price, for nothing? We moved through the market, a small gray island in a sea of color and noise. Every person who glanced at us sent a fresh wave of panic through my veins. Did they see the fear on our faces? Did they see the invisible brand of Providence Valley on our foreheads? I imagined my father's reach extending even here, that any one of these strangers could be an agent sent to drag us back. My mind was a whirlwind of fear and a fragile, desperate hope. This was the calm before the storm. Not a peaceful calm, but the heavy electric stillness in the air when the clouds have gathered and the first drops of rain have yet to fall. My own heart was the eye of that storm, quiet and terrified while the world raged around me. I scanned every stall, my eyes searching for a woman selling preserves, a woman with my mother's jawline. We passed vendors selling bright bolts of fabric, stalls piled high with shiny tinware, butchers with sides of beef hanging from hooks. It was a world of dizzying abundance, so different from our spare, rationed existence. For a moment, I felt a profound sense of loss for the life we had never been allowed to even imagine. We were so close, yet safety felt 1,000 miles away. We saw a few women selling jams and jellies, and at each one my heart would leap, but none of them felt right. None had the look of family. The hope in my chest was starting to feel thin and frayed. Then, at the far end of the square, I saw her. A woman standing behind a small table laden with jars that glinted like jewels in the morning sun. She was older, her hair streaked with gray, but she had my mother's cheekbones. My breath caught in my throat. It had to be her. "There," I whispered to my sisters. We started towards her, our steps hesitant, and that's when the final storm broke. As we got closer, a man stepped up to her stall. My stomach plunged. I recognized him. His name was Abel, a trader from a nearby settlement who did business with my father, a man known for his loyalty to the valley's ways. He spoke to our cousin, his voice low and earnest, but the wind carried his words to us. He wasn't yelling. He was being kind, concerned. It was far more deadly. "Just a word of caution, ma'am," he said. "There's a sickness of the mind that has taken 4 of Josiah's daughters in Providence, a contagious delusion. They've run off. They're lost and not in their right minds. The poor man is worried sick. He's asked us all to keep an eye out, to make sure no good-hearted folk get taken in by their mad ramblings. He was poisoning our only well of hope. He was painting us as lunatics, a danger, a curse. My father, from miles away, was still fighting us, still trying to cage us with lies. Our cousin's eyes widened, a flicker of fear in them. And then she looked up over Abel's shoulder and saw us, 4 girls, wild-haired, clothes torn and dirty from the mountains, one of us looking lost to the world, clinging to the others. We were the perfect picture of the story he was telling. Abel turned, saw us, and a look of cold, righteous pity crossed his face. He gave our cousin a meaningful nod, as if to say, "See, just as I said." Then he turned and walked away, melting back into the crowd. He left his poison hanging in the air, shimmering and deadly, between us and our last hope on this earth. My cousin, our mother's kin, stared at us. Her face, which a moment ago had been our beacon, was now a wall of fear and doubt. Everything we had endured, the sister we'd left behind, the family we had ruined, the brutal journey, it all came down to this one silent moment. I took a single, trembling step forward. My mouth was dry as dust. I had to say something. I had to undo the lie. But for the life of me, I had no idea what words could possibly be strong enough to do it. For a long moment, we just stood there, frozen in the space between my father's lie and our one sliver of hope. The noise of the market faded to a dull roar in my ears. All I could see was the woman's face, our cousin's face, and the fear in her eyes. I opened my mouth to speak, but only a dry little croak came out. "We're not sick," I stammered. "He's lying." But my own voice betrayed me. It was thin and reedy, the voice of a frightened child, not a woman telling the truth. I sounded exactly like the delusional runaway the man had described. I saw the wall of pity and fear go up in her eyes. She started to turn away, a small final shake of her head, ready to dismiss us, to save herself from the trouble we so clearly represented. Seeing her turn away was like watching the last door on earth close in our faces. A raw, ragged sob broke from Leah, loud and startling. People at the next stall turned to look. Ruth grabbed my arm, her fingers digging into my skin like claws, her eyes wide with a silent, desperate plea. Do something. The whole fragile architecture of our escape was collapsing, right there in the middle of the crossroads market. We were about to lose everything. In that moment of pure, blinding panic, something inside me went quiet. The fear was still there, but it was like I was standing in the calm eye of my own personal hurricane. Arguing was useless. Pleading was useless. My father's lie was a fortress, and I couldn't break it down with reason. I had only one stone to throw against that wall. A memory. A truth so small and so private that no lie could counterfeit it. I took a deep breath and looked directly at our cousin, my voice low and clear, cutting through Leah's sobs. "My mother, your cousin, Sarah, she used to sing us a song when we were small. A silly rhyme, it made no sense. I could feel my sisters staring at me, wondering what I was doing. It was about a fox." I began to hum a strange, lopsided little tune. My memory, usually such a fickle friend, gave me the words. "The fox with silver paws," I said, my voice shaking, "went dancing in the house, to steal the farmer's stars." I let the words hang in the air. I let my own memory falter. A genuine moment of an old woman's mind reaching for a half-forgotten thing. I looked at her, my eyes begging her to remember. Her face, which had been a mask of fear, suddenly went slack. Her jaw dropped slightly. The change was so sudden, so total. It was like the sun breaking through a storm cloud. She stared at me, her eyes seeing past the dirt and the fear, seeing a little girl in a sunlit room, hearing a song from another lifetime. It was a song her own mother used to sing to her, a secret tune that belonged only to the 2 sisters, Sarah and her. A rhyme about a fox stealing stars from a jar. It was the one key that could fit the lock of her heart. Her voice was a choked whisper, but we all heard it. "From a jar." She finished the line. The fortress of my father's lie crumbled into dust. She looked at us, truly looked at us, and saw not madwomen, but kin. Her kin. The lie was broken. "Oh, my dear Lord," she breathed. The fear in her eyes was replaced with a fierce, protective urgency. "Quickly, not here." She sprang into action, her hands flying as she began to pack her jars into crates, shielding us with her body from the prying eyes of the market. "Stay close to me. Don't speak to anyone." She was our general now, and we were her exhausted army. She led us away from the square, through a maze of narrow, winding alleyways that smelled of wood smoke and rain. The relief was so powerful, it made my knees weak. We were safe. Someone believed us. We had won. Her house was small and clean, at the very edge of town where the fields began again. It was the most beautiful place I had ever seen. She ushered us inside, bolting the door behind us. She gave us water, and the simple act of kindness, of being cared for, was so overwhelming I thought I would weep. I looked at my sisters. Leah's sobs had subsided into quiet, hiccuping breaths. Ruth was leaning against a wall, her eyes closed, as if the strength had gone out of her all at once. Dinah was looking around the little room with a flicker of simple curiosity. We were wretched and exhausted, but we were together, and we were safe. I allowed myself to take one deep, shuddering breath, the first true breath of freedom I had taken in years. And then came the knock on the door. It wasn't a friendly tap. It was a hard, sharp, authoritative rap that echoed through the small house like a judge's gavel. Our cousin froze, her face going pale as milk. She looked at me, her eyes wide with a fresh, new terror. I thought we had won. I thought the storm had passed and we had reached the shore. But as that knock vibrated through the floorboards, I knew the terrible truth. We hadn't outrun my father's storm at all. We had just run right into its eye. My heart stopped. In that split second, every possible terror flooded my mind. It was my father, come to drag us back. It was Abel, the traitor, with other men from the valley. The flimsy door felt like the only thing between us and the end of our story. My cousin was frozen, her hand over her mouth. My sisters huddled behind me, a line of dominoes ready to fall. But there was no more running. I had been a coward for so long, living in the shade of fear. No more. I straightened my shoulders, walked to that door, and pulled it open, ready to face my jailer. But it wasn't my father. Standing on the small porch was a tall man wearing a silver star on his vest, the town sheriff. And beside him, his hat clutched in his hands, his head bowed, stood the Miller boy. The boy we thought we had ruined. He wouldn't meet my eyes. The sheriff looked past me, his gaze taking in my frightened sisters, the sparse but clean room. "Ma'am," he said, his voice deep and steady. "Are you Sojourner Taylor, daughter of Josiah Taylor?" I nodded, unable to speak. "This young man," he said, gesturing to the boy, "and his father. They told us some troubling things about a place called Providence Valley, about a prophet who answers to no law but his own. The final plot twist of my life wasn't a cruel one. It was a revelation that struck me with the force of a lightning bolt. All this time, I had seen our escape as a failure, a desperate flight that had cost an innocent family their home. But I was wrong. Being cast out was the very thing that had set the Millers free. With nothing left to lose, they hadn't just disappeared into the wilderness. They had come to crossroads. They had gone to the law. The boy's testimony, his story of my father's tyranny, was the spark that had finally brought the light of the outside world into our dark valley. The sheriff wasn't here to arrest us as madwomen. He was here because we were the first credible witnesses in his investigation of a cult. Our desperate, flawed, and costly escape hadn't just been for us. It was the beginning of the end for Father Josiah. In the weeks that followed, the world we knew was dismantled. The law, once it had a reason to look, unraveled Providence Valley thread by thread. My father's authority, built on isolation and fear, crumbled under the weight of outside scrutiny. He died 2 years later, they told me, a prophet with no one left to listen. Elias, the man who was supposed to be our husband, vanished like smoke in the wind. Our cousin took us in, and we 4 sisters had to learn to live in a world that wasn't a prison. The wounds were deep, and they healed in different ways. Leah, my sister of lost laughter, found her voice again. She fell in love with a gentle-hearted carpenter who was patient with her fears, and they moved to a state with an ocean so she could finally see it for herself. Ruth, ever the practical one, bought a small plot of land. She spent the rest of her days with her hands in her own soil, growing things not out of duty, but for the simple joy of it. Little Dinah. Her mind never fully came back from the place it had gone to hide. Our cousin cared for her with a tender love until the day she passed, a quiet, gentle soul who was, in her own way, finally at peace. And Esther, my brave, complicated sister. She never left the valley. When the community dissolved, she stayed, a silent caretaker of its ruins. I would go back sometimes to see her. We didn't talk much. We didn't have to. We'd sit on the porch of the old assembly house, and I'd look at her, at the quiet strength in her face, and I'd understand. She had her own kind of faith, one that was stronger than my father's, and she lived it out with a dignity that humbled me. I chose this life, here in this little house. I never married again. I found a strange comfort in the solitude, a peace in the quiet. It's a different kind of quiet than the one in Providence. That was the silence of fear. This is the silence of healing. I learned that the only holy union that ever truly existed in that valley wasn't the one decreed by a man of God. It was the one sealed in a dark room with the gift of a blue-flowered blanket. It was the desperate, holy sacrifice of one sister for the others. Freedom, I've come to learn, ain't a place you finally arrive at. It's the choice you make every single morning to not let the chains of your past be the walls of your present. My story is just one story, a whisper from a valley that ain't on any map. But I know there are other valleys, other silences. If my story moved you, don't just keep it to yourself. Let it be a reminder of the strength you have inside you, the strength to speak your own truth. Even if your voice shakes, share it with someone who needs to hear that it's never too late to find your own crossroads. Thank you for being my witness. Please, subscribe. Stories like mine can find their voice. And before you go, tell me in the comments, what city are you watching this from? It does an old woman's heart good to know how far her words can travel.